The late afternoon sun, a hazy orange disk sinking behind the skeletal branches of the oak tree in his front yard, did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in Jake's bones. It was a chill born not of the autumn air, but of the gnawing anxiety that had become his constant companion. He wiped a grease-stained hand across his forehead, leaving a dark smudge on his already grimy skin, and stared at the pile of bills on his small, cluttered kitchen table. Red ink screamed from several of them. Final notice. Payment overdue. Each one felt like another stone added to the already crushing weight on his chest. His daughter, 7-year-old Lily, sat at the same table, humming softly as she meticulously colored a picture of a unicorn with a rainbow mane. Her tongue poked out from the corner of her mouth in concentration, a tiny replica of the way her mother used to look when she was engrossed in a book. The thought brought a familiar ache, a pang of loss that time had dulled but never erased. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, taken by an illness that had swept through their lives like a sudden storm, leaving Jake to navigate the wreckage alone, Lily his only lifeboat. "Daddy, look." Lily held up her drawing, her bright blue eyes, so like Sarah's, shining with pride. "Isn't she beautiful?" Jake forced a smile, the kind he'd perfected over the years, one that he hoped masked the turmoil inside. "She's amazing, sweet pea. The most beautiful unicorn I've ever seen." He reached out and ruffled her blonde hair, the silky strands, a stark contrast to his own rough, calloused fingers. He worked part-time at Gus's garage, the pay barely enough to cover rent on their small, slightly dilapidated house and put food on the table. The part-time aspect was a constant source of frustration. Gus was a good man, but business had been slow, and full-time hours were a distant dream. His own attempts to pick up side jobs, fixing neighbors' sputtering lawnmowers or ancient washing machines, brought in a little extra, but it was never quite enough to get ahead. The biggest bill, the one that made his stomach clench every time he looked at it, was for the mortgage. He was 2 payments behind, and the bank's letters were becoming increasingly threatening. Losing the house, this small haven that held all his memories of Sarah and Lily's entire childhood, was his deepest fear. It was a fear that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the numbers swimming before his eyes. He was a good mechanic, he knew that. He had a knack for coaxing life back into even the most stubborn engines, a patience for the intricate dance of gears and wires. If he could just catch a break, a real opportunity, he could build something, provide for Lily the way she deserved, but brakes seemed to be in short supply these days. His old pickup truck, a battered but reliable Ford, was his lifeline, essential for hauling tools and parts, and occasionally for Gus when the shop's tow truck was busy. It was also, he realized with a fresh wave of despair, almost out of gas, and his wallet was heartbreakingly thin. He heard a sigh from Lily and looked up. She was staring at the bills now, her earlier cheerfulness fading. "Are those worried papers again, Daddy?" she asked, her small voice laced with an understanding that tugged at his heart. "Just grown-up stuff, sweet pea," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "Nothing for you to worry about." He swept the papers into a messy pile and shoved them into a drawer. Out of sight, not quite out of mind, but better than letting Lily see the anxiety they caused him. He needed to be strong for her, always, even when he felt like he was crumbling inside. He thought of the meager contents of their refrigerator, the dwindling supply of cereal. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure something out. He always did, somehow. But the somehows were getting harder to find. The old truck coughed and sputtered as Jake pulled up to the rusty gas pump at the edge of town, the only one that still sometimes allowed a few dollars on credit if you knew the owner, old Mr. Henderson. Today, however, a cash-only sign was taped firmly to the pump, its stark black letters a clear refusal of his silent plea. He sighed, leaning his head against the steering wheel for a moment. He had exactly $7 and change in his pocket, enough for maybe 2 gallons, not nearly enough to get him through the next few days of hopeful job hunting and potential side gigs. As he was about to resign himself to those 2 gallons, a sleek, dark sedan pulled up smoothly on the other side of the pumps. A woman emerged, her tailored suit and confident stride looking distinctly out of place in this dusty, forgotten corner of Oakhaven. She looked around, a slight frown creasing her brow, then her eyes landed on Jake's truck. More specifically, on the flatbed that, despite its age, was still sturdy. She approached him, her heels clicking on the cracked asphalt. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "I'm in a bit of a bind. My own vehicle, which was supposed to be a utility van, had a rather spectacular breakdown about 10 miles back, and I desperately need to transport some supplies to the old community hall on Elm Street. It's for a children's charity event I'm trying to get off the ground." She gestured vaguely. "Would you, by any chance, be available for hire? Your truck looks like it could handle the load." Jake straightened up, surprised. He took in her expensive clothes, the subtle gleam of a gold watch on her wrist. She didn't look like someone who frequented places like the Oakhaven Community Hall, which was usually reserved for bingo nights and struggling local craft fairs. "Well, ma'am," he began, his mind racing. Hire? That meant money. But his truck was practically on fumes. "I'd like to help, but I'm just about out of gas myself." He felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. Her eyes, a surprisingly warm hazel, softened slightly. "Oh, I see. Perhaps I could cover your fuel and then pay you for your time and the use of your truck," she offered. "I really am stuck. These supplies need to get there today, or the setup will be completely derailed for tomorrow morning." She looked genuinely distressed. Jake hesitated. Lending his truck, even driving it himself for a stranger, felt risky. What if something happened to it? It was his most vital asset. But the mention of a children's charity, the urgency in her voice, and the simple fact that she needed help resonated with his ingrained instinct to assist when he could. And the offer to cover fuel was a lifeline he desperately needed. He thought of Lily, of the worried papers. "All right," he said slowly. "I can help you out. But what kind of supplies are we talking about? And how far is Elm Street?" "Oh, thank you." Relief washed over her face. "It's mostly boxes of decorations, some tables, folding chairs, nothing too heavy. Just bulky. Elm Street is only about 5 miles from here, towards the center of town. My name is Evelyn, by the way. Evelyn Hayes." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Jake Miller," he replied, self-consciously wiping his own hand on his jeans before shaking hers. Her grip was firm, confident. "So, you want me to drive it over for you?" Evelyn bit her lip. "Actually, this is a bit more complicated. I need to be at the hall to direct the unloading and start the setup immediately. My team is small, and they're waiting for me. Would it be an enormous imposition to ask if I could borrow your truck, just for a few hours? I can leave my car here as collateral, of course, and I'll pay you very generously for the inconvenience. I can fill it up with gas for you right now before I go." Jake's internal alarms went off. Lend his truck to a complete stranger? Even one who looked like she owned half the county? It was a huge risk. His truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was his livelihood, his security. If something happened to it, he looked at her car. It was clearly expensive, a late-model luxury brand. That offered some reassurance. He glanced back at his fuel gauge, which was practically kissing the E. He thought of the overdue mortgage. His mind wrestled. The responsible part of him, the part that had been battered by hardship, screamed, "No!" But another part, the part that remembered his mother always saying, "Kindness costs nothing, Jake, but its value is immeasurable," whispered that this woman was in genuine need. She was trying to do something good for children, and she was offering to solve his immediate fuel crisis. "Ma'am, Evelyn," He corrected himself. That's a big ask. This truck is, well, it's everything to me. Her expression was earnest. I understand completely, Jake, and I wouldn't ask if I weren't desperate. I promise, I'm an excellent driver. I'll treat it as if it were made of spun glass. I can give you a cash deposit as well, for your peace of mind, on top of the rental fee and the gas. She opened her stylish handbag, and Jake caught a glimpse of a wallet that looked thicker than his entire week's pay. He looked at her again, trying to gauge her sincerity. There was a weariness around her eyes that her polished appearance couldn't quite hide, but also a determination that he recognized. It was the look of someone trying to make something happen against the odds. He knew that look well. "All right," he said, the word coming out before he could second-guess himself again. His gut, which had guided him through many a tricky engine repair, told him, surprisingly, that he could trust her. "All right, Evelyn. You can borrow the truck." He swallowed hard. "But please, be careful with her. She's an old girl, but she's reliable if you treat her right." Evelyn's smile was dazzling, transforming her face. "Oh, Jake, thank you. You have no idea what a lifesaver you are." She immediately moved to the pump, pulling out a credit card. "Let's get this old girl a full tank, shall we? And then we can discuss a fair price for your extraordinary kindness." Jake watched, a mixture of disbelief and trepidation churning within him, as the numbers on the gas pump climbed higher than they had in months. He had just handed over the keys to his entire working life to a woman he'd met 10 minutes ago. He really hoped his gut knew what it was doing. He wondered, briefly, if this was what it felt like to take a leap of faith, or if he was just being incredibly foolish. The line between the two felt dangerously thin. Evelyn was true to her word. She filled the truck's tank to the brim, the nozzle clicking off with a satisfying finality that Jake hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity. Then, she insisted on giving him $200 in crisp new bills, $100 for the rental, as she termed it, and another $100 as a good-faith deposit, which she assured him she wouldn't dream of asking back. "Regardless, this is too much, Evelyn," Jake stammered, staring at the money in his hand. It felt like a fortune. This would cover the gas for weeks, buy a decent amount of groceries, maybe even make a small dent in one of the less aggressive bills. "Nonsense," she said briskly, though her eyes were kind. "Your generosity is worth far more. I'll have it back to you by mid-morning tomorrow at the latest, parked right here. I'll call you if there are any changes, but I anticipate being done with the heavy lifting by late this evening." She scribbled a number on a piece of paper from her purse. "This is my cell, and you have the keys to my car. It's probably worth more than your truck and my left kidney combined, so I have every incentive to return yours promptly and in perfect condition." She gave him a wry smile. He pocketed the money, still feeling dazed. "Okay, mid-morning tomorrow." He handed her the worn keys to his Ford. "She has a bit of a knack to starting when she's cold. You gotta pump the gas twice, then turn the key just so." "I'll be gentle," Evelyn promised, her fingers closing around the keys. She gave him another grateful look, then walked towards his truck with a determined stride, hopped in, and after a moment of Jake holding his breath, the engine rumbled to life with its familiar, comforting growl. She gave a little wave and pulled out onto the road, heading towards Elm Street. Jake stood there for a long moment, watching his truck disappear down the road, the $200 feeling heavy in his pocket. He then looked at the sleek, silent sedan parked beside him. He walked over and peered through the window. Leather seats, a dashboard that looked like something out of a spaceship, and that new car smell that spoke of money and a life vastly different from his own. He felt a strange mix of anxiety for his truck and a bizarre sense of unreality. He had Lily to pick up from her after-school program. With his truck gone, he'd have to walk, but the 2 miles suddenly seemed less daunting with a full stomach of impending groceries and a little less weight from the worried papers. The walk to Lily's school was filled with a peculiar lightness. The $200 was a significant boon, a temporary reprieve from the constant financial pressure. He found himself imagining what he could do with it. A proper grocery shop. Not just the bare essentials. Maybe even a small treat for Lily, a new coloring book, or perhaps that sparkly pen set she'd been admiring in the window of the stationery store. For the first time in a long while, a sliver of hope had pierced through the gloom. When he arrived at the school, Lily ran to him, her face lighting up. "Daddy, did you fix lots of cars today?" "Not exactly, sweet pea," he said, swinging her up into his arms. "But I did something a little different, and guess what? We're going to the big supermarket tonight, and you can pick out any cereal you want." Lily's eyes widened. "Any cereal? Even the one with the marshmallows?" "Even that one," he confirmed with a grin, the image of Evelyn Hayes driving away in his beat-up truck momentarily forgotten in the glow of his daughter's delight. The small act of lending his truck had already brought this small joy. Perhaps, just perhaps, he hadn't been foolish after all. He held Lily close, the scent of her hair a comfort, and started the walk home, his steps a little brisker, his heart a little less burdened. The night passed with an unusual sense of calm for Jake. After a surprisingly bountiful dinner, thanks to the unexpected cash, and tucking a happy Lily into bed, with her new marshmallow cereal box already waiting on the counter for breakfast, he sat on his worn porch swing, listening to the crickets. He still felt a niggle of worry about his truck, a paternal concern for its well-being in the hands of a stranger, however well-intentioned she seemed. But the overwhelming feeling was one of cautious optimism. Evelyn Hayes had seemed genuine, her need urgent. He replayed their conversation. Her gratitude, the firm handshake. She hadn't haggled, hadn't questioned, she'd just been thankful. He woke early the next morning, a habit ingrained from years of needing to make the most of every daylight hour. Lily was still asleep. He made coffee, the aroma filling the small kitchen, and found himself glancing out the window every few minutes, anticipating the familiar rumble of his Ford's engine. "Mid-morning," she'd said. He tried to busy himself, tidying the already tidy living room, checking the oil in his ancient lawnmower, a task he'd been putting off. Around 10 o'clock, just as a sliver of anxiety began to creep back in, he heard it, the distinct, slightly wheezy, but powerful sound of his truck turning onto their street. He hurried to the door, a wave of relief washing over him. There she was, his faithful Ford, looking none the worse for wear, pulling up carefully to the curb. Evelyn Hayes stepped out, looking as polished as she had the day before, though perhaps a little tired. She smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, Jake. She's all yours, safe and sound. Handled those boxes like a champion." "Morning, Evelyn," he said, trying to keep his voice casual, not betraying the relief he felt. "Glad to hear it." "No problems, then?" "None at all," she assured him, handing back his keys. "She started right up this morning. Just like you said." She paused, then reached into the cab of the truck and pulled out a long, official-looking envelope. "Jake, I wanted to thank you again. Properly." He frowned slightly. "You already did, Evelyn. The money yesterday was more than generous." "That was for the rental and the inconvenience," she said, her hazel eyes serious. "This is something else." She held out the envelope. "Yesterday, I told you I was looking for people who still believe in kindness. It wasn't just an idle comment. My late father used to say that the true measure of a person isn't how they act when the spotlight is on them, but how they behave when they think no one is watching, or when there's nothing obvious to gain." Jake took the envelope, a strange feeling prickling at the back of his neck. It felt heavier than it should for just a thank you note. I don't understand." "You helped me yesterday, Jake," Evelyn continued, her voice soft but firm. "You had every reason to say no. Your truck is clearly important to you, vital. I was a stranger, asking for a significant favor, offering what probably seemed like a risky proposition. But you listened, you saw someone in need, and you chose to trust, to help. without knowing anything about me, beyond the fact that I was trying to do something for children. She gestured to the envelope in his hand. I run a small foundation, a very private one. Its purpose is to identify and support individuals who demonstrate genuine, selfless acts of kindness, especially when they themselves might be facing their own struggles. We believe that such people are the quiet pillars of our communities, and they deserve to have their burdens eased, to be given a chance to thrive. Jake's mind was reeling. A foundation? Supporting people? This was getting more surreal by the minute. He looked down at the envelope, then back at Evelyn, a dawning suspicion, too wild to truly believe, starting to form. Go on, she urged gently. Open it. His fingers fumbled with the flap. Inside, there wasn't a letter. There was a check. A cashier's check, made out to Jake Miller. He stared at the amount, his breath catching in his throat, his heart beginning to pound against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had to read it 3 times to be sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. The sum written there was enough to pay off his mortgage entirely, with a substantial amount left over. It was more money than he had seen in his entire life. Evelyn, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I can't accept this. This is crazy. His hand was trembling so hard the check rattled. It's not crazy, Jake, she said, her gaze steady and unwavering. It's an investment in someone who embodies the very principles my foundation seeks to promote. Yesterday, when I paid for your gas, I discreetly noted the name of your bank from the overdue notice peeking out of your glove compartment. Forgive the slight snooping. It was necessary. A quick confidential inquiry by my foundation's financial advisor confirmed the outstanding balance on your home. This check covers that, plus a little extra to help you get properly back on your feet, maybe invest in your own mechanic business full-time, if that's your dream. Jake was speechless. He sank down onto the porch step, the check clutched in his hand. The world seemed to tilt and sway. Overdue debts gone? The fear that had been his constant shadow for years, potentially vanquished by this single piece of paper. It was too much to comprehend. He looked up at Evelyn, who was watching him with a patient, almost understanding expression. Why? He finally managed, the word barely a breath. Why me? Because, Jake, she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. You didn't hesitate to help someone in need, even when you were clearly struggling yourself. You offered your most valuable possession to a stranger based on trust and a desire to contribute to something good. That kind of character is rare. And it's precisely what my father wanted to encourage in the world. She paused. He believed that kindness isn't a transaction. It's a fundamental human quality, and when we find it, pure and unprompted, we should nurture it. Lily chose that moment to come padding out onto the porch, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, her unicorn pajamas slightly askew. Daddy? Who's that? She mumbled. Then her eyes widened as she saw Evelyn. Evelyn's smile softened even more as she looked at Lily. Good morning. You must be Lily. Your father is a very kind man. Jake looked from the incredible check in his hand to his daughter's innocent face, then back to Evelyn, the woman who had appeared out of nowhere and seemed poised to change his entire life with an act of staggering generosity. Hope, a powerful, almost overwhelming wave of it, surged through him, so potent it almost brought tears to his eyes. His world, which had felt so small and constrained by hardship, had just been thrown wide open. The path ahead was suddenly, astonishingly, bright. The initial shock, the sheer, disbelieving vertigo of holding that check, began to slowly recede, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude so immense it left Jake feeling lightheaded. He stared at the figures, the zeros seeming to dance before his eyes. It was real. This wasn't a dream. He looked up at Evelyn, who was now crouching down slightly to talk to Lily, asking her about her unicorn pajamas with a gentle interest that seemed completely genuine. Evelyn, Jake said, his voice still thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it. This is life-changing. She straightened up, her gaze meeting his. The only thanks I need, Jake, is for you to use it to build a good life for yourself and Lily. To perhaps, in your own way, continue to pay that kindness forward when you see an opportunity. That's the true return on this investment. His mind, however, was already grappling with the implications. Such a vast sum of money, given so freely, it felt like a weight, a responsibility as much as a gift. His pride, a stubborn, ingrained part of his character, pricked at him. He'd always believed in earning his way, in standing on his own 2 feet, however battered those feet might be. I still feel like I should do something for this, he said, gesturing vaguely with the hand holding the check. Work it off somehow. I'm a good mechanic, Evelyn. I can fix anything, or help with your charity, the one you were hauling supplies for. Evelyn considered him for a moment. The community hall event was a success, thanks in no small part to your truck. The children had a wonderful time. As for what you can do, perhaps there is something. My foundation, while well-funded, is always looking for practical, on-the-ground ways to make a difference. And I, personally, am always interested in ventures that empower people. She paused. You mentioned wanting to have your own mechanic business full-time. Tell me about that. And so, standing there on his porch, with Lily now leaning shyly against his legs, Jake found himself talking. He spoke of his dream of a small, honest garage, one where people wouldn't feel ripped off, where quality work and fair prices were the standard. He talked about perhaps taking on an apprentice someday, teaching a young person a valuable skill, giving them a chance like he wished he'd had earlier in life. He spoke of his passion for engines, the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life. Evelyn listened intently, her expression thoughtful. She asked pertinent questions, not just about mechanics, but about business, about community, about his vision. It wasn't the idle curiosity of a wealthy benefactor, it felt like the focused interest of a seasoned entrepreneur, which, he was beginning to realize, was exactly what she was. A community-focused garage, she mused when he'd finished, one built on integrity and skill. That has potential, Jake, real potential. She tapped a thoughtful finger against her chin. What if my foundation were to offer you something more than just this check? What if we were to offer you a startup loan on very favorable terms to properly establish Miller's Mechanics, with a small portion dedicated to a training program for at-risk youth once you're established? Jake's jaw practically dropped. First, the erasing of his debts, and now this, an offer to fund his dream? You'd do that? I told you, Evelyn said, a slight smile playing on her lips. We invest in people we believe in. Your actions yesterday spoke volumes about your character, your passion for your craft and your vision for a community-centered business today that speaks to your potential. This isn't charity, Jake. This is partnership. A different kind of partnership, perhaps, but one based on shared values. The world seemed to be reconfiguring itself around him, old anxieties being replaced by new, exciting possibilities. Yet, a small, persistent voice of doubt still whispered in the back of his mind. It all seemed too good to be true. People like him, struggling mechanics from the forgotten side of town, didn't just get handed their dreams on a silver platter by wealthy, mysterious benefactors. There had to be a catch. Why are you really doing all this, Evelyn? He asked. More directly this time. No offense, but people with your kind of money don't usually spend their time looking for struggling mechanics to help. What's your story? Evelyn's smile faded slightly, and a shadow passed through her eyes, a hint of a past that wasn't all polished success. My father, she began, her voice a little softer, built a very successful company from nothing. He was a brilliant businessman, but he could also be ruthless. He believed in hard work, yes, but sometimes he forgot the human cost. Towards the end of his life, he had regrets. He realized that all his wealth hadn't brought him the kind of fulfillment he truly craved. She looked out towards the street, as if seeing something far away. He started this foundation very quietly, almost as a penance, I think. He wanted to find and reward the kind of simple, uncalculated goodness he felt he'd too often overlooked or dismissed in his pursuit of success. When he passed, he left me in charge of it with a very clear mandate. Find the helpers, the quiet heroes, and give them a lift. Not a handout, but a hand up. She met Jake's gaze again. I've seen what happens when kindness is absent. I've seen how easily people can be broken by hardship, by indifference. And I've also seen the incredible resilience of the human spirit when just one person shows a little compassion. Your act of lending me your truck, Jake, it wasn't just about the truck. It was a symbol. In a world that can often feel cynical and self-serving, you chose trust. That resonated with me and with the core mission of my father's legacy, more than you can imagine. Her explanation, so personal and candid, chipped away at Jake's remaining skepticism. He saw not just a wealthy entrepreneur, but a woman carrying out a deeply meaningful mission, perhaps one that was healing for her as well. The catch wasn't a hidden agenda. It was a shared belief in the power of human decency. Okay, Jake said, taking a deep breath. He felt a sense of resolve solidifying within him, a new kind of determination that wasn't born of desperation, but of opportunity. Okay, Evelyn, if you're serious about this partnership, then so am I. Miller's Mechanics. I like the sound of that. A genuine, warm smile spread across Evelyn's face. I do too, Jake. I do too. She then glanced at her watch. I have a meeting I need to get to, but my office will be in touch with you later today to discuss the next steps for the loan and the business plan. We have people who can help with the financial projections, legalities, all of that. She held out her hand again. Welcome to the start of something new, Jake Miller. He shook her hand, his grip firm this time, not out of social formality, but out of a burgeoning sense of shared purpose. Thank you, Evelyn, for everything. Ross. As she walked back to her sleek sedan, Lily, who had been listening with wide-eyed wonder, finally spoke. Daddy, she whispered, tugging on his jeans. Is that lady a fairy godmother? Jake looked down at his daughter, then at the check still in his hand, and then at the retreating figure of Evelyn Hayes. He chuckled, a genuine, heartfelt laugh that felt like it came from a place deep within him that hadn't seen light in years. Maybe she is, sweet pea, he said, scooping Lily into his arms. Maybe she is. The future, once a terrifying unknown, now felt like an open road, full of promise and possibility. And for the first time in a very long time, Jake Miller felt truly, profoundly hopeful. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and emotion for Jake. True to her word, Evelyn's office contacted him. He found himself in meetings with polite, efficient people who spoke of business plans, cash flow projections, and incorporation documents, a world utterly alien to him, yet one they navigated him through with patience and clarity. The check, the one that had initially felt like an impossible dream, was deposited into a new bank account, the teller raising a respectful eyebrow at the sum. The first thing Jake did was pay off his mortgage in full, the feeling of handing over that final payment bringing tears to his eyes. The worried papers were finally, truly gone. Evelyn, despite her own busy schedule, made time to meet with him personally on several occasions. She wasn't just a distant benefactor. She was actively involved, offering advice that was both practical and insightful. She had a sharp business mind, honed by years of experience, but she never made Jake feel inadequate. Instead, she encouraged his ideas, helped him refine his vision for Miller's mechanics. He learned that her primary business was in sustainable technology, a far cry from auto repair, but her principles of ethical operation and community benefit seemed to apply universally. He found a small, defunct garage on the edge of town, one that had been closed for years. It was run down, needed a lot of work, but the bones were good and the rent was reasonable. Evelyn's foundation provided the startup loan, and Jake threw himself into the renovation with a fervor he hadn't felt in years. He painted, he repaired, he installed new lifts and diagnostic equipment, some new, some carefully sourced and refurbished with Evelyn's team's help. Lily would often help too, handing him tools, usually the wrong ones, but with great enthusiasm, or drawing pictures on dusty patches of the floor with chalk. The process wasn't without its internal struggles for Jake. Accustomed to scarcity, the idea of spending the loan money, even on necessities for the business, sometimes made him anxious. He'd lie awake at night, second-guessing decisions, worrying about failing, about letting Evelyn and her foundation down. The weight of her belief in him was a powerful motivator, but also, at times, a heavy burden. What if he wasn't up to it? What if his dream was bigger than his ability? During one such moment of doubt, he found himself confessing his fears to Evelyn over a cup of coffee at the Greasy Spoon diner near his new garage. I keep thinking, what if this all goes south? He admitted, stirring his coffee more vigorously than necessary. What if I can't make it work? You've invested so much in me. Evelyn listened patiently, her expression calm. Jake, she said gently, every entrepreneur, every person who has ever tried to build something has those fears. It's natural. But fear can be a compass, pointing you towards the areas you need to strengthen, or it can be an anchor, holding you back. You have the skill, you have the integrity, and you have the passion. Those are the most important ingredients for success. The rest is learning, adapting, and persevering. She smiled. And remember, you're not entirely alone in this. My team and I are here to offer guidance when you need it. Her reassurance helped, as did the tangible progress he was making. The garage was slowly transforming from a derelict shell into a clean, professional workspace. He even designed a simple logo, a wrench and a spark plug intertwined, with Miller's Mechanics, honest work, fair prices, written beneath it. However, not everyone in Oakhaven was as enthusiastic about Jake's sudden change in fortune. Whispers started to circulate. Some were envious, others suspicious. Old Man Hemlock, a curmudgeonly neighbor who'd never had a good word for anyone, was heard grumbling at the post office about some folks having all the luck and wondering aloud where Jake Miller, who'd always been poor as a church mouse, had suddenly found the money to open a fancy new garage. One afternoon, as Jake was fitting a new set of tires on a customer's car, one of his first, a referral from Gus, who was genuinely pleased for Jake's new venture, a sleek black car, different from Evelyn's but just as expensive, pulled up outside. A man in a sharp suit, with a colder, more appraising look than Evelyn, stepped out. He had an air of impatient authority. "Jake Miller?" the man asked, his tone clipped. He didn't offer a handshake. "That's me," Jake replied, wiping his hands on a rag, a sense of unease settling over him. "Marcus Thorne," the man said, as if the name itself should command respect. "I'm an associate of Evelyn Hayes. A business partner, you might say, in some of her less conventional ventures." His eyes swept around the garage, a flicker of something that looked like disdain in them. "She's told me about you. Her little kindness project." The way he said kindness project made it sound like something foolish, a childish indulgence. Jake felt his hackles rise. "Evelyn has been very generous," Jake said evenly. "She's given me an opportunity I never thought I'd have." Thorne gave a short, humorless laugh. "Generous? Or naive?" Evelyn has a tendency to let her sentimentality cloud her judgment. Investing this kind of capital in an unproven entity based on a sob story and a borrowed truck, it's hardly sound business practice. He stepped closer, his voice dropping slightly. I'm here to ensure Miss Hayes's enthusiasms don't become significant liabilities. I'll be keeping an eye on this little enterprise of yours, Miller, very closely. The implied threat was unmistakable. Thorne was clearly skeptical, if not outright hostile, to Jake's involvement with Evelyn and her foundation. He represented a different side of Evelyn's world, the hard-nosed business aspect that perhaps viewed her philanthropy as a weakness. This was a new kind of obstacle, not financial, but personal, rooted in cynicism and suspicion. "You can watch all you like, Mr. Thorne," Jake said, his own resolve hardening. He wasn't the same desperate man Thorne probably imagined him to be. Evelyn's belief had kindled a new confidence in him. "I plan on making Miller's Mechanics a success, for myself, for my daughter, and yes, to prove that Evelyn's trust wasn't misplaced." Thorne's lips curled into a smirk. "We shall see, Miller. We shall see." He gave one last, dismissive look around the garage, then turned on his heel and strode back to his car, leaving Jake with a knot of anger and determination in his stomach. He now understood that Evelyn's world wasn't just filled with kind-hearted philanthropists. There were sharks in those waters too, and Marcus Thorne looked like one of the biggest. This fight wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about defending Evelyn's vision and his own hard-won chance. The encounter with Marcus Thorne left a bitter taste in Jake's mouth, but it also served to galvanize him. Thorne's cynicism was a challenge, and Jake was determined to meet it head-on by making Miller's Mechanics not just a success, but a testament to the values Evelyn cherished. He threw himself into the work with renewed vigor, ensuring every repair was meticulous, every customer treated with respect and honesty. Word began to spread slowly through Oakhaven. People, initially curious or skeptical, were won over by Jake's fair pricing and the quality of his work. Gus, true to his supportive nature, sent more referrals his way, telling his own overflowing clientele that Jake was one of the good ones. Evelyn, when Jake recounted the visit from Thorne, listened with a frown. "Marcus can be abrasive," she admitted. "He's a brilliant strategist in our tech ventures, but he views the Foundation's work with a certain pragmatism that often borders on outright skepticism. He sees it as a drain on resources that could be better invested for purely financial returns. He doesn't understand the intangible returns, the human capital. He made it pretty clear he thinks I'm going to fail, or that I'm some kind of opportunist," Jake said, the memory still rankling. "Then we'll just have to prove him wrong, won't we?" Evelyn said, a spark of defiance in her eyes that mirrored Jake's own. "Don't let him get to you, Jake. Focus on what you're building. Your success will be the best answer to his doubts." As Miller's Mechanics started to gain traction, Jake began to think more seriously about the community aspect Evelyn had encouraged. He remembered his earlier, half-formed idea about an apprenticeship. Oakhaven had its share of restless teenagers, kids hanging around street corners with little to do and fewer prospects. He knew what that was like, to feel adrift, to crave a skill, a purpose. He spoke to Evelyn about it. "I'm not sure I'm ready yet. The business is still new," he mused. "But I was thinking about taking on a young apprentice, someone who needs a chance, teach them the trade, give them some direction." Evelyn's face lit up. "Jake, that's a wonderful idea. That's exactly the kind of ripple effect the Foundation hopes to inspire. We can even help structure the program, perhaps offer a small stipend for the apprentice through a vocational grant." And so, the search began. Jake put up a notice at the community hall, the very place Evelyn had needed to deliver supplies to that fateful day, and spoke to some of the local teachers. He wasn't looking for the top student, but for someone with a flicker of interest in mechanics, someone who was perhaps being overlooked. A few weeks later, a lanky teenager named Leo, hesitantly walked into the garage. He was quiet, almost painfully shy, with a mop of dark hair that constantly fell into his eyes. He'd heard about the apprenticeship from his shop teacher, who told him Mr. Miller was a fair man. Leo's family life was tough, his grades weren't great, and he'd been drifting. But he liked tinkering with things, even if he didn't have much opportunity. Jake saw something in Leo's hesitant curiosity, a spark of untapped potential. He took him on, starting him with simple tasks: cleaning tools, organizing parts, observing. Leo was clumsy at first, often quiet, but he was a keen observer and a surprisingly quick learner when it came to the mechanical side of things. Jake was patient, explaining concepts clearly, demonstrating techniques, much like Gus had done for him years ago, albeit in a less formal capacity. Lily, who often came to the garage after school, took to Leo immediately, chattering away to him as he worked, seemingly unbothered by his initial shyness. Her innocent presence helped to lighten the atmosphere, and slowly Leo began to open up, asking questions, even venturing a smile now and then. The bond between Jake and Evelyn also deepened during this period. They were partners, not just in a financial sense, but in a shared mission. They'd often meet to discuss the progress of the garage, the apprenticeship program, or new ideas for community outreach. Evelyn would share snippets about her own demanding work in the tech world, the pressures and challenges she faced, including ongoing friction with board members like Thorne, who were wary of her philanthropic endeavors. Jake, in turn, found himself able to talk to her about his own life, his hopes for Lily, his lingering grief for Sarah, in a way he couldn't with many others. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a mutual respect forged from that first unconventional encounter. One late afternoon, Evelyn stopped by the garage. She found Jake and Leo working side by side, replacing a faulty alternator on an older sedan. Leo, more confident now, was explaining to Jake what he thought the next step should be, his voice no longer hesitant. Lily was at a small table Jake had set up for her, diligently fixing a toy car with a plastic wrench. The scene was one of quiet industry, of mentorship and budding hope. Evelyn watched them for a moment, a soft smile on her face. This, she thought, was what her father had envisioned. Not just writing checks, but fostering these small ecosystems of growth and connection. However, Marcus Thorne had not forgotten about Miller's mechanics. He saw Evelyn's increasing involvement and the positive buzz around Jake's garage, not as a success, but as a potential threat to his own influence within Evelyn's company and foundation. He believed Evelyn was being naive, her pet project, a vulnerability. He started to dig, looking for any angle, any piece of information he could use to discredit Jake or undermine the entire endeavor. He had investigators discreetly looking into Jake's past, his financials before Evelyn's intervention, even interviewing disgruntled former acquaintances of Jake's from years ago, trying to paint a picture of incompetence or unworthiness. One evening, Evelyn called Jake, her voice unusually strained. "Jake, we need to talk. Marcus, he's found something. Or rather, he's trying to make something out of nothing. He's planning to present it to the Foundation's advisory board next week, to argue that my support for you was ill-advised, and that further funding for community initiatives like the apprenticeship program should be curtailed." A cold dread seeped into Jake. Found something? What could he possibly find? His life had been an open book of struggle, but he'd always been honest. "It's about your old debts before I stepped in," Evelyn explained, her voice tight with frustration. "He's managed to get copies of some of those old, threatening letters from the bank, the ones about the mortgage. He's also dug up a minor dispute you had with a parts supplier 5 years ago. A misunderstanding that was resolved, but he's twisting it to make you look financially irresponsible, even dishonest. He's painting a picture of you as someone who was on the brink of complete financial ruin, implying you manipulated me or that I was reckless in my assessment." Jake felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by a familiar wave of despair. Just when things were looking up, just when he was starting to believe in this new life, the past was being dragged out and distorted to destroy it all. The old fears, the ones about not being good enough, about losing everything, resurfaced with a vengeance. The worried papers might be gone, but their ghosts, it seemed, could still be summoned. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Evelyn's reputation, the future of her foundation's good work, and Leo's chance. The stakes had suddenly become incredibly high. The news of Marcus Thorne's maneuvering hit Jake hard. It felt like a punch to the gut, a deliberate attempt to shatter the fragile peace and hope he had so recently found. The thought that his past struggles, the very hardships Evelyn had sought to alleviate, were now being weaponized against him and against her, filled him with a cold fury. But beneath the anger was a tremor of fear. Thorne was powerful, connected, and clearly ruthless. "What does this mean for the foundation, for your work?" Jake asked Evelyn, his voice strained during a late-night call. Lily was asleep, and the silence of the small house seemed to amplify his anxiety. "It means Marcus is going to try and convince the advisory board that I'm too emotionally driven, that my judgment is compromised when it comes to these kindness projects, as he calls them," Evelyn explained, her own voice laced with weariness and frustration. "The board has oversight, and while I hold significant sway as my father's heir, they can make things very difficult. They could demand more stringent, impersonal criteria for future aid, effectively dismantling the very spirit of what we're trying to do. They could even try to freeze funding for initiatives like your apprenticeship program, deeming them too high risk or low return in purely financial terms." Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just about his garage anymore. It was about the principle Evelyn stood for, the good she was trying to put into the world. It was about Leo and other kids like him who might get a chance because of her vision. "What can we do?" Jake asked. "How do we fight this?" "We present our own case," Evelyn said, a note of steel entering her voice. "We show them the truth. We show them what Miller's Mechanics has become, what it represents. We show them Leo. We show them that this isn't just about sentimentality, but about tangible, positive impact. The board meeting is in 5 days. I want you there, Jake. I want you to speak, to tell your story, not the twisted version Thorne will present, but the real one." The thought of speaking in front of a board of wealthy, influential people terrified Jake. He was a mechanic, comfortable with engines and tools, not with public speaking or corporate boardrooms. But the thought of Thorne winning, of Evelyn's work being undermined, was even more terrifying. "I'll be there," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next few days were fraught with tension. Jake continued to work at the garage, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for Leo and his customers, but his mind was constantly replaying Thorne's smirking face, Evelyn's worried voice. He found himself practicing what he would say, muttering to himself as he tightened bolts or changed oil, trying to find the right words to convey the truth of his journey, the depth of his gratitude, and the importance of what Evelyn was doing. Leo, perceptive despite his youth, noticed Jake's distraction. "Everything okay, Jake?" he asked one afternoon while they were cleaning up the shop. "You seem worried." Jake hesitated, then decided to be honest, at least in part. "There's a bit of a challenge, Leo. Some people don't quite understand what we're trying to build here, or why Miss Hayes is helping us. They think it's a bad idea." Leo frowned, his loyalty to Jake and the garage already firmly established. "But it's a good idea. You're teaching me stuff, Jake. Real stuff. And people like coming here. You fix their cars right." His simple, earnest words were a balm to Jake's anxious spirit. "Thanks, Leo. That means a lot." He realized then that Leo was part of his story, living proof of the program's value. Evelyn, meanwhile, was preparing her own defense, gathering testimonials from other small projects the foundation had supported, compiling financial data that, While perhaps not showing the astronomical returns Thorne valued, demonstrated sustainability and community benefit. She and Jake met several times, going over their strategy. She encouraged him to simply speak from the heart. "They need to see the man I saw, Jake," she said. "The one who lent his truck to a stranger, not for personal gain, but because it was the right thing to do." The day of the board meeting arrived, grey and overcast, mirroring Jake's mood. He put on the best clean shirt he owned and a pair of jeans that weren't stained with grease, feeling utterly out of place as Evelyn drove them to the imposing downtown building where her foundation's main offices and the boardroom were located. The lobby was all marble and hushed efficiency, a world away from the comforting clutter of Miller's Mechanics. Marcus Thorne was already there when they entered the polished mahogany boardroom, schmoozing with several stern-faced board members, men and women in expensive suits who looked at Jake with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. Thorne gave Jake a predatory smile, a silent promise of the attack to come. The meeting began, and Thorne, cool and articulate, laid out his case. He presented Jake's past financial struggles as evidence of chronic irresponsibility, the old parts supplier dispute as a sign of untrustworthiness. He painted Evelyn's support for Jake as an emotional decision, a reckless gamble with the foundation's resources, a deviation from sound fiscal management. He spoke of fiduciary duty and risk mitigation, his words designed to appeal to the board's business acumen and their inherent caution. As he spoke, Jake felt himself shrinking, the old insecurities Thorne was so skillfully exploiting rising to the surface. He saw a few board members nodding along, their expressions growing more concerned. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She spoke with quiet passion, not refuting Thorne's facts directly, but reframing them. She spoke of the Foundation's true mission, her father's vision of investing in human potential, not just financial portfolios. She spoke of Jake's character, the act of kindness that had started it all. And then she turned to Jake. "But don't just take my word for it," she said. "Jake Miller is here today. He can tell you himself what this support has meant, not just to him but to his community." All eyes turned to Jake. His heart pounded in his chest. This was it. He stood up, his hands clammy. He looked at the expectant faces, at Thorne's smug smirk. For a moment, his mind went blank. Then he saw Evelyn, her expression encouraging, and he thought of Lily, of Leo, of the garage that had become his lifeline and his pride. He took a deep breath. "Good morning," he began, his voice a little shaky at first. "My name is Jake Miller, and yes, everything Mr. Thorne said about my past struggles is true. I was drowning in debt. I was scared of losing my home. I was just trying to keep my head above water, to provide for my little girl." He paused, then continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke his truth. "And then I met Evelyn. I lent her my truck, not because I expected anything in return, but because she needed help. And it was for a children's charity. It felt like the right thing to do. What she did for me next, it was a miracle. It wasn't just about the money, though that saved my home. It was about someone believing in me when I had almost stopped believing in myself." He talked about Miller's Mechanics, not as a financial investment, but as a place of honest work, a place where people were treated fairly. He talked about the pride he felt in building something with his own hands, something that served his community. "And then," he said, his voice softening, "there's Leo." He gestured towards the door where, by prearrangement with Evelyn, Leo was waiting nervously with his shop teacher. "Mr. Thorne talks about risk. But what about the risk of letting a kid like Leo fall through the cracks? He's smart, he's hard-working. All he needed was a chance, someone to teach him, to believe in him. The apprenticeship program, the one Mr. Thorne wants to cut, gave him that chance. He's not just learning to be a mechanic, he's learning self-respect, he's finding a future." He asked if Leo could come in. With a nod from the chairman, Leo entered, looking small and overwhelmed in the grand room. but he stood straight. Jake asked him a few simple questions about what he was learning, what the garage meant to him. Leo, though nervous, spoke earnestly about how Jake was teaching him, how he finally felt like he was good at something. His simple, unvarnished testimony was more powerful than any of Thorne's sophisticated arguments. When Leo had finished and quietly left with his teacher, Jake looked directly at the board members. Evelyn's investment in me, in Miller's Mechanics, it wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about fixing a life. It was about building community. It was about giving someone like Leo a shot. Maybe that doesn't show up on a traditional balance sheet, Mr. Thorne, but I can tell you, the returns are immeasurable. This foundation, under Evelyn's guidance, it doesn't just give money, it gives hope, and I believe that's the most valuable investment you can make. He sat down, his body trembling slightly, emotionally exhausted but feeling a sense of peace. He had spoken his truth. The rest was out of his hands. The boardroom was silent for a long moment. The board members looked at each other, then at Thorne, whose smug expression had faltered, replaced by a frown of irritation. Then they looked at Evelyn and at Jake. One of the older board members, a woman known for her astute financial mind, but also her quiet philanthropy in other areas, finally spoke. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice crisp, your concerns about fiscal responsibility are noted. However, the mandate of this foundation, as established by Mr. Hayes Sr., was always twofold: prudent stewardship of assets and the fostering of human potential and community well-being. It seems to me that in the case of Mr. Miller and this apprenticeship program, Miss Hayes has achieved both. This is not a reckless squandering of funds. It is a targeted investment with clear, demonstrable positive outcomes, both for the individual and the community. Perhaps, Marcus, you are looking at the ledger through too narrow a lens. Other board members murmured in agreement. The tide had turned. Thorne's carefully constructed case, built on cynicism and selective facts, had crumbled in the face of genuine human experience and heartfelt testimony. The board voted not just to continue supporting Miller's Mechanics and the apprenticeship program, but to explore ways to expand such community-focused initiatives under Evelyn's continued guidance. Marcus Thorne sat defeated, his face a mask of controlled fury. He had underestimated Jake Miller, and he had underestimated the power of a simple story, honestly told. Evelyn reached over and squeezed Jake's hand under the table, her eyes shining with relief and gratitude. They had faced the storm, and they had weathered it. Together. Jake felt a profound sense of victory, not just for himself, but for the quiet power of kindness that Evelyn had championed, a power that had just proven itself resilient in the face of calculated cynicism. The future of Miller's Mechanics, and the hope it represented, was secure. The aftermath of the board meeting was one of quiet triumph and profound relief. As they left the imposing building, stepping out into the now clearing afternoon, Jake felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had faced his fears, spoken his truth, and, in doing so, had not only secured the future of his business and Leo's apprenticeship, but had also validated Evelyn's faith in him. "You were incredible, Jake," Evelyn said, her voice warm with admiration as they walked to her car. "You didn't just defend yourself, you championed the very essence of what the foundation stands for." Jake managed a tired smile. "I just told them what was true, Evelyn. And I had a lot to fight for." He thought of Lily, of Leo, of the garage that was now so much more than just a place of work. It was a symbol of his second chance, a testament to the fact that good things could happen, even to someone like him. Marcus Thorne's defeat was a significant turning point. His influence on the board regarding the foundation's community initiatives was visibly diminished. While he remained a powerful figure in Evelyn's other business ventures, his attempt to discredit her philanthropic work had backfired, ironically strengthening her position and resolve in that arena. He offered no apologies, of course, just a curt, resentful nod as they passed him in the hallway after the meeting. Jake knew Thorne would likely remain a background threat, a reminder of the cynicism that existed in the world, but he no longer held the power to intimidate him. In the weeks and months that followed, Miller's mechanics truly began to flourish. The positive publicity from the near miss at the board meeting, which Evelyn subtly allowed to filter out through supportive channels, actually brought in new customers curious about the garage with a heart. Leo, buoyed by the confidence Jake and Evelyn had shown in him, blossomed under Jake's mentorship. He was becoming a genuinely skilled young mechanic, his earlier shyness replaced by a quiet competence and an eagerness to learn. Jake even started him on customer interactions, teaching him how to explain repairs clearly and respectfully. The apprenticeship program, now firmly endorsed and even slightly expanded by the foundation, became a small beacon of hope in Oakhaven. Jake, with Evelyn's help, took on a second apprentice a few months later, a young woman named Maria who had a fierce intelligence and a passion for mechanics, but had faced barriers due to her gender in a traditionally male-dominated field. Leo, now the senior apprentice, took great pride in helping to guide her. Jake's life settled into a new rhythm, one of purposeful work, financial stability, and growing community involvement. He was no longer just struggling to survive. He was thriving, building something meaningful. He had enough money to provide comfortably for Lily, to ensure she had everything she needed, and even some of the things she just wanted, like art supplies that weren't from the dollar store, and occasional trips to the small amusement park in the next county. Her laughter was more frequent. Her worried papers comment a distant memory. His relationship with Evelyn also solidified into a deep and abiding friendship, underscored by their shared experiences and mutual respect. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other's endeavors. Evelyn would often stop by the garage, not just for formal meetings, but sometimes just for a cup of coffee and a chat, a brief escape from the high-pressure world of her corporate life. She enjoyed the unpretentious atmosphere of Miller's mechanics, the scent of oil and hard work, the easy camaraderie between Jake, Leo, and Maria. It was a grounding influence for her, she often said. One sunny Saturday afternoon, about a year after that first fateful encounter, Miller's Mechanics hosted a small community open house. It was Evelyn's idea, a way to celebrate their first anniversary and to thank Oakhaven for its support. There was barbecue sizzling on a grill, Lily and some of her friends drawing with chalk on the clean driveway, and a steady stream of locals wandering through the now spotless bays. Admiring the equipment and chatting with Jake, Leo, and Maria, Jake stood watching the scene, a content smile on his face. His garage was more than just a business. It was becoming a community hub. He saw Gus chatting animatedly with one of Jake's regular customers. He saw Leo confidently explaining the workings of an engine to an interested teenager. He saw Maria, grease smudge on her cheek, laughing as she showed a group of young girls that yes, women could indeed be mechanics. Evelyn found him standing there, a glass of lemonade in her hand. "Well, Jake Miller," she said softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Look what you've built." He turned to her, his heart full. "Look what we've built." "Evelyn," he corrected gently. "None of this would have happened without you, without your kindness, without your belief." "I just opened a door, Jake," she replied. "You were the one who had the courage to walk through it and to build something wonderful on the other side." She paused, then added, "My father would have been incredibly proud of what his legacy has accomplished here. He always hoped it would do more than just write checks. He hoped it would spark exactly this kind of change." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the happy scene, Lily ran up and threw her arms around Jake's legs. "Daddy, this is the best party ever," she exclaimed, her face beaming. Jake scooped her up, his gaze meeting Evelyn's over Lily's head. In that moment, surrounded by his thriving business, his dedicated apprentices, his joyful daughter, and the steadfast support of a woman who had become his dearest friend and partner, Jake felt a sense of peace and fulfillment he had never imagined possible. The struggles of his past had not been erased, but they had been transformed, woven into the fabric of a richer, more meaningful life. He had found more than just financial security. He had found purpose, community, and an enduring hope that had been born from a simple act of kindness on a day when all had seemed lost. The quiet power of compassion, he now knew, was the strongest engine of all. And his journey, he felt with a surge of quiet joy, was really just beginning.